Hey everyone, welcome to Doc's next event. I'm Nick Lambert, I'm the CEO of Doc, and today, rather than being joined by external guests as we normally do, we have the pleasure of being joined by Ewan Miller, who's our Head of Sales and Partnerships, and also Richard Esplin, who is our Head of Product. Hi guys.
How are we doing, guys?
Hello.
Fantastic. So I think today's topic is a really interesting one. It's one that we've been close to for quite some time. And the topic that we're going to be exploring today is going to be looking at how do IDVs, identity verification providers, how can they fix entity resolution and customer data matching to reduce onboarding friction? So quite I can't even speak anymore. There's quite a lot of words there, but I think we'll start to unpack those as we go through. I think specifically sometimes I find entity resolution a bit kind of confusing as a term, and really what we're talking about there is how do we identify, in this use case we're talking about in the context today, how do we identify a specific individual as they go through a kind of platform? So that's going to really be the basis for this discussion. So Ewan, you've spoken to many identity companies on your travels. We've looked at kind of IDVs and IAM companies, and we've found that quite a lot of them kind of face this problem. And you kind of discovered this during a lot of your business development and kind of go-to-market calls. Is that right? And maybe can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we've spoken to hundreds of companies in the 2 years. 400 or 500 companies in the time that I've been here over the last couple of years. We've had about 100, met with about 100 or so identity providers across CAM, biometrics, your traditional KYC, and we've spoken from everyone from the CEO all the way to your sort of middle-level product people, and we're talking to them about ecosystems and credentials and how they can be reused, and it was really sort of it first came up sort of October of last year around this entity resolution piece, and it was a really forward thinking senior vice president of product that was sort of articulating to us the problems that come up with you know when someone gets an IDV check, or when they do onboard at a bank. It's not as simple as the bank or the IDV makes it out, and there are lots of complexities that come with it, and there's a way in which credentials could potentially solve some of those problems. So we're hoping to make quite a complicated subject a little bit more simple and a little bit more easy to digest, that Richard will hopefully go through in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'm sure we're in very good hands. And I think as well, like you in this, I think also what this highlights is the importance of speaking to the market. So I think any company out there that's kind of developing with the blinkers on and not speaking to the market about what their problems are going to miss opportunities. So I think it would be fair to say this is a non-obvious kind of opportunity here, or a market that we've come across as a result of speaking to lots of different people. So I think it definitely, if that's something that you're not doing, definitely you should. So I think in this session, we're going to explain, like I said, entity resolution and the customer data matching problem. We're also going to look, obviously, we're a decentralized identity and verifiable credential platform. So we're going to look at how we're applying our technology to fix this issue. We'll do that through a demo that Richard will run us through. Ewan, I think, actually will maybe run us through, and then also Richard's going to take us through the kind of theory and the thoughts behind it, kind of during a kind of a short presentation. I think the whole session should last about an hour, maybe a little bit less. We'll just need to see how many questions that we get. So after the presentation, we'll do some questions that I've got that I think people would probably want to know the answer to. And thanks again to the audience for joining us. So if you've got some questions that we're not covering, or ones that you specifically want to know, please pop them into the Riverside chat there, and we'll pick those up and make sure we ask those to the guys later on. And if you could also put, it'd be fun to know where people are kind of listening in from. So if you have joined us, please pop a message in the chat. That would be really helpful to us, just so we know that there's people out there actually listening to what we're saying. So that'd be really helpful for us. So without further ado, Richard, if you're all ready, I can pass over to you for the presentation.
Thanks for the introduction, Nick and Ewan. And I'm excited to talk with everybody today about how verifiable credentials help with that entity resolution problem. And I see the first question in the chat is what's an entity? And so I'm glad I have a definition for you. Entity resolution goes by a lot of different names, as you can see in that list. A lot of people learn about this in their software engineering classes under lots of different names. But in a digital identity context, it's the problem of matching the correct records in your database to the person you're currently identifying. And that gets really complicated when entities don't share a common identifier. This is especially true when you're trying to do fuzzy matching, when you're matching on synonyms or you're looking at a collection of attributes and you're trying to figure out what's the likelihood that this is the same person, or that these two different rows are the same person, these two different databases are the same person, or that the information you have is actually about the person in front of you. And as every identity professional knows, this can be a problem. This gets really challenging. IDVs, they all operate in their own way and they want to differentiate themselves in the market with their own processes. So they each rely on their own data sources. They each rely on their own matching logic. They all want to add their own special sauce that gives them an advantage and gives them the best quality data. But that means that when the business who's a relying party needs to consume this data, they've got to reconcile this information. They have to decide which one do they trust the most. And oftentimes there's conflicting information if they're using more than one IDV provider, and they have to figure that out. This can be an expensive problem. The most common way we all deal with this problem is when you're signing up for a new service and you're presented with a form fill. And the consumer who's given this form fill, they start moving through this form. Oftentimes, as soon as they see the form, they're going to close the tab. It's just too big a pain. They're tired of this. And they drop out of your funnel. It gets even worse when you're asking them to go find a paper document and upload that passport, upload that driver's license. Assuming they're willing to do that, then they have to go through the attribute validation or the form fill validation. My email address is the wrong format, or I had a typo in the name, or it's not enough characters in my middle initial or whatever. And they go through that process. Assuming they have the patience get all the way through that, there's always exceptions. And you have a human team that has to resolve these exceptions. There's often customer support calls. And even when everything goes well, the business relying on this data, they have that nagging feeling that there's fraud, or they have that fear of having rejected a good customer because of an erroneous KYC failure. And there's really three causes to why this entity resolution is so difficult. The first is that question of which of the external data sources is the right one to use for this person. And when we're using more than one, how do we know they're talking about the same person? So IDV1 on the left, it was a business. We're going to rely on Focal Point in this example to get KYC information, to get an address out for Janet Doe. And then we have to go to a credit bureau to get the credit score. And so this second IDV, they give us a credit score for Janet Doe. But how do we know it's the same Janet Doe? How do we know this is actually about the same human and not two different people? And the most, obviously we can get more confidence if we collect more information. Let's ask Janet for her birthday. Let's ask Janet for her tax ID number. Let's ask Janet for her phone number. Janet might find that a little creepy. And even if we get enough information to have a high likelihood, over a large population of people, you can't be certain in every case that you've got an exact match. The second cause it shows that the problem exists even in the same database. There are a lot of reasons why somebody might end up in the same database multiple times. They might have gone through onboarding multiple times. They might have worked with different systems at different points in time that end up being merged in the same system. Or even when we use their name and their address, those things aren't static over time. So this example, our Janet Doe sometimes goes by Jane, sometimes goes by Janet. She lives in Ohio. She has a life event change and changes her name. And then she moves to Missouri. And then she decides to go back to using Janet instead of Jane. These are all the same human, but the database, how do we know in the database that these are all referring to the same person? It's a difficult problem to do that matching. And the third example is when we have multiple internal databases, that even when we're all within the same company, we often don't use a consistent identifier. Part of this is because we acquire these databases at different times, maybe from a subsidiary business or maybe from a new product or a team that set up their own data system and haven't integrated with the rest. Sometimes it's just because integrating IAM systems is difficult. We end up in silos, and it's expensive to tie those together. And even when an organization is working with multiple IDV providers, maybe multiple KYC providers, we often end up with duplicate databases internally, or with multiple databases internally that reflect that external data as we consume it. But in a lot of cases, it's just the regulatory requirements are so different for the data, it's easier to manage them in different databases. So in this example, we've got patient health data on the left, we've got payment data on the right. Those have completely different compliance regimes. It's pretty hard to reconcile those in a single governance process. And so keeping those in separate databases make things easier. In all of these cases, there's a common root cause, and that's that the person isn't part of the IDV process. We're asking third parties to gossip about the consumer. And if we instead create a verifiable credential from the IAM database entry, then we give that credential to the consumer. We ask them to verify their data. We ask them to resolve themselves by saying this data applies to me. Then we've got a certain match. Like we know the user told us that it applies to them. The consumer told us who it applies to. And so what's this look like in practice? That initial IDV process, it stays the same. That's where these identity providers, these credit bureaus and identity agencies and KYC bureaus, they all have very mature processes to try and figure out what data applies to this person with a high likelihood. So once you've gone through that process, then you take that database decision and you put it into a credential and store it with the user under the user's control. And now we get the value, because when that user returns, or if they go to another business in your ecosystem, you can ask them to present that credential, and you don't have to go back through that complicated process before. You know that that you have that certain match between that previous decision and the current person you're talking to. And of course, this works the same whether it's a returning customer to your business or whether you're sharing this data with your business partners in an ecosystem. So we've moved to this verifiable trusted credential, this verifiable credential we're getting from the user. So Jane Doe says, I have this address, I have this credit score, I have this annual income, and she's liable for fraud if she's lying to you. But if that's the case, she had a lie to get that credential in the first place. But you don't have to trust Jane. You're still trusting that same data source. The same issuer of the credential is the same IDV that you were trusting before. So you don't have to change your business posture around trust and around level of assurance. You're trusting the same people because they're signing the credential. And because they sign the credential in a tamper-proof way, if Jane messes with that information, it's not gonna verify. And so when Jane gives you that information, you know it's exactly the way she received it from the trusted source. And the result is that accurate customer data matching every time. You move from that form fill view to a frictionless API slurp of the data. You press the button and it goes in. There's no typos. There's no resolving attribute form validation. And it streamlines that process. And it also ties in really well with your automated backend. So you don't have to have as many humans involved in the process. There's fewer exceptions to deal with, fewer customer support calls, improved satisfaction all around. And that same process works in your ecosystem. Because you've given that credential to Jane, or in this case, Sophia, she can take it to the people she does business with. She can take it to the bank, she can take it to the auto dealer, she can take it to the insurance company, and get that interoperability between these systems, all with consent, all with the user in control, all with the user asserting, this is me, and without having the guesswork involved with doing a likelihood match. So that's the entity resolution problem with its many names: data matching problem, customer resolution problem, and how verified credentials turn it on its head to make it really clean. I know who I'm talking to because they're sharing with me the data they got from my trusted source. With that, I know that Ewan can show how this works in a real world scenario.
Cheers, Rich. I know there are some questions already going in, Nick. I don't know. Do you want to hold them to the end, or shall we?
Yeah,
do you want to?
yeah, that'd be great. Ewan, if you don't mind running through the demo, and then we can maybe pick up a lot of those questions at the end. That would be ideal.
Sure. No, makes sense. It is, there's a lot to unpack there that Richard has talked through, and as I say, we have thought about this a lot over the last sort of 12 to 15 months. We have, we've heard from multiple CPOs, head of products, chief technology officers, CEOs, and got a number of feedback, got quite a lot of feedback. And there are we've built a demo that we have done before, but also there are a number of other ways in which you could do this or think about this. And, Richard and I and Nick can maybe build some of that out for you. But what we're trying to show you here is just sort of like the basic concept of how this would work in the sort of doc solution. So if you guys haven't, I'm sure you guys have, but if you guys haven't, we have access to this is a solution portal which you can get access to for 30 days. You can't get access to the ecosystem feature unless you come speak to us, but this is an ecosystem that we've built. And sort of what Richard is explaining here is an IDV could potentially become what we call an ecosystem administrator, essentially be a convener for different participants to participate in a verifiable credential ecosystem. So the IDV or the KYC or CIAM platform doesn't necessarily have to be an issuer of the credential. There may be a verifier, but that we give you that flexibility. And what you're doing here is you're defining the roles within that private ecosystem, and then you're essentially controlling who verifies which type of credential. So what Richard was talking about is if someone gets KYC'd or goes through an IDV process, you could give them a bank identity. You could give them a credential with their credit score, or you could give them a proof of address, a proof of date of birth, whatever the organization thinks is useful in that re-verification process, which we're going to show you. We also can allow you to create a really interesting business model around this. So you can assign a verification fee to the credential. So if a participant in the ecosystem wants to verify that credential, the ecosystem administrator could set a price for that fee. We don't track anything about the holder. We're just registering a transaction, or a verification transaction. You can download a billing report and see what that looks like. I can't. Richard and his team and Mike and the team have created some really cool way in which to do that, but I can't explain that to you because it's all crazy cryptography and all really exciting stuff. Now, what I'm going to show you here is sort of just a normal a normal process that happens when you onboard to a bank. And what we're trying to simulate here is the wallet here on the left hand side is just a normal banking app, right? What we're showing you is something quite basic functionality on how it works and what credentials look like. But remember, in a sort of real world use case, those credentials, the customer doesn't necessarily need to see the credentials. They could just sit behind someone's profile. You can make that UI still as exciting and as interactive as you like. You can embed a mobile SDK inside the app. So, it's not like you're sacrificing UX or a fantastic experience for your customers. Those credentials could sit behind someone's profile, or you can access them in multiple different ways. So I'm going to do a normal identity check. This is obviously not real. This is just simulated, but because I'm not from California and my name's not John. But I'm going to go through that sort of identity verification check. I'm going to scan my passport. I'm going to do the liveness check. That's before I had a mustache. And then I'm going to submit my application. So remember what Richard was saying. The credential piece, that the credential issuance doesn't happen just yet. All right, you have to go through a normal KYC identity verification check. And then what you're asking the customer is, do you want to be part of this ecosystem? And what we're Clarity Partners here is if you remember, it is what we're in this use case is the KYC an identity provider. And you could call that ecosystem whatever you like, but we just called it the Clarity Partners ecosystem for now. And obviously the UI doesn't need to look like this, right? It could look like whatever you want it to be like, but we're just, for the sake of the demo, we're just trying to make it really simple. And then you're going to then ask, if you're happy to accept, you're going to scan the QR code. It's going to ask for your biometric, right? So we have this biometric plugin, so you can actually tie the biometric, facial scan, a thumbprint to the credential itself. So you need to prove who you are before you present it for verification. You can't see that, but I don't know if you can see it, but it's asking for my thumbprint, which I'll give it. And again, you guys have probably seen this before. There we go. Press continue. I'm going to share that information. Selective disclosure. Again, it doesn't need to look like this, right? It could be whatever you could just have that one click, or you could pull up certain pieces of information. That verification is going to happen. So the identity verification is going to, the KYC identity vendor is going to do all that great stuff. It's going to send the data to the bank server, and then it's going to hit our API and issue credentials to the wallet. So you see a set of credentials going into the wallet. Now, this is where sort of what Richard was talking about comes into play. So say, for example, I then want to get a loan. I want to access another service internally within the bank. It could be anything. Loan, mortgage, transaction over a certain amount, whatever. You could use credentials as part of that verification process. Right, so you don't have to go through the same KYC check again, which can be slow. It may give you false information that Richard was talking about, and all that complexity. If you could use a set of credentials, it could provide a fantastic user experience. You can pre-populate the form, so you don't have to go through 15 minutes of form filling. And then secondly, it could provide a more secure and reliable verification for the identity provider. So that means that they can onboard that customer quicker and faster. So the bank has a happy customer, the identity verification provider has a more reliable check, and everyone's happy. So I'll just quickly show you that. So again, I'm going to scan the QR code. You see how the form is empty. It's going to ask for my biometrics. Before I present those credentials, I have to prove that it's me. I'm going to select all of that stuff. Again, it doesn't need to look like this, and it doesn't need to be as tedious as this, but we're just showing you guys, because you guys are hopefully going to roll this out to customers. Fundamentally what it looks like. Underneath, I'm going to press continue. See all this information that's been verified. I'm going to share that, and it's going to pre-populate the form with that verified data. See all the green ticks that happen here. And then when I press submit, it's going to use those credentials for the identity check, and then it's then going to provide a quicker, faster, more secure, reliable identity verification. And I submit my application. My loan has been approved. Now, we can obviously go through all the different elements. You can still revoke credentials if you want. You could use that outside of the bank's ecosystem. So the really exciting thing for identity verification providers is being able to connect their customers, so consumers like us, with other businesses that use that identity verification provider. I'm at the limit of my own sort of technical ability there. So Rich is going to keep us honest on maybe that's one of the questions that we can talk about. But I can show you revocation and what that looks like. But hopefully, you guys have probably seen the demo before. But hopefully that sort of shows how, sort of just touches on what what Richard is talking about. You have to do an identity verification, and then you could reuse those credentials for a more reliable re-verification and onboarding to other services outside of the bank. And maybe I should just do it, because I think I've got Slack messages. So it's probably Nick and Richard telling me that I should do it. So I'm going to do it anyway. So I may have to revoke the credential actually. Let me go through it just quickly. So I'm going to revoke the credential. Right, I got updated, a new credit score. A new credential is going to get sent into the wallet. See, that comes through here on the left-hand side. And then my other credential gets revoked. You see, it got revoked just there. It's valid. Again, doesn't need to look like that. You can take the credential straight out of the wallet. It doesn't need to stay there, but we have to demo it to you, so we have to show that working. So then I'm going to get, again, sort of apply for an apartment. So that could be, we use an apartment, but it could be onboarding to a bank and then going to a gambling going to a gambling company, a betting company. I could onboard to that. I could onboard to that service. It could recognize, it could pull those credentials from my wallet, from my other wallet, and onboard me to that solution, that company quicker and faster, because the IDV recognizes that you've already gone through an identity verification before. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to scan the QR code. It's going to pre-populate the form. There we go. I'm going to share all that great stuff like I did before. Ooh. It's going to pre-populate it, and then if I try to then use that revoke credential, took a couple of seconds there, but that's all good. So I can move on to the next part of that process. If I try to then use that revoke credential, so it's here, it's just said, hey, like if you have a credit score over a certain amount, you can get a lower deposit. If I try to use that, then it will recognize that credential's been revoked and you can't use it. It does take, in a test environment, just about sort of 10 or 20 seconds, because it has to hit the revocation registry and come back. But ultimately, it will say verification failed and you can't move on to that next step of that journey. So I see 7 messages on Slack. Hopefully I did what you guys were looking for, and it all makes sense. And yeah, I'll throw it back to you, Nick, for take it to the next for perhaps for questions.
Very good. Yeah, thanks. And I'm really glad. Great job, guys. I'm also glad the curse of the demo didn't impact us too much today. So that was good to get a nice smooth run through all of that stuff.
That first, the first one went and it was a bit slow. Yeah, I thought we were cursed, but it all worked well.
We made it safe and sound. So thanks, guys. That's really informative. I see kind of lots of questions coming in from the audience in the chat. Brilliant. Please keep them coming. What we'll do next then is go through some of the questions that I think or we hear come up quite often, and I'll ask those to the guys, and then we'll obviously then refer to any of the audience questions at the end of the session. So straight into the other questions. So first one on to you, Richard. If anyone in the audience is wondering, where are the credentials stored in this instance? What are we talking about?
Yeah, and in this demo, the credential lives on the edge on the user's mobile device. We do recognize there's scenarios where that might not be appropriate. Not everybody has a smartphone, or people lose their smartphones a lot. We have one customer, a couple of customers in Africa where people regularly get their smartphones stolen. We actually heard that from London as well. So we do have a new offering that you can see in the documentation a couple of weeks ago, recent release of a cloud wallet that allows you to store that data encrypted on our servers, but it's processed on the edge. So we can allow that recovery into the mobile app, and we can allow we can allow the same credentials to be viewed in multiple mobile apps, but it's all accessed with the user's biometric. And so we can't see that data. It's still in the user's control, even though it's backed up on our servers.
Thank you, Richard. So I guess there's lots of options there for companies integrating this solution. There's lots of different wallet options depending on their attitude towards privacy and customer control, etc. So that's really good to know. Next question, ask Ewan, but if you don't know, then Richard, it's okay to jump in as well. How do you see this solution working with the rollout? There's a lot of new stuff happening right now, Ewan, as you're more than well aware, around government issued digital ID. So if you're not living under a rock on the moon, MDLs is obviously top of mind, as is EIDAS in Europe coming along. So how will this solution work alongside these new developments?
Yeah, definitely. So I always come back to this point. I think it was on the last webinar that we had, right? Everyone has a different attitude. We serve a global set of customers, right? Just going back to Richard's point, and I think there's some comments in the chat about privacy. Everyone has a different perspective on it, right? And it's not our job to judge. We just need to provide solutions that then our customers can make the decisions that are right for them. There are some offerings that are more privacy preserving and some are not. It's not up to us, as I say, to judge. And it's the same with the government issued identities, right? Everyone's, governments, you speak to someone on the West Coast of the US versus someone perhaps in Germany or elsewhere, they have a different view on what the government should be doing for them. Right. So so on the government issued side of things, again, it's another huge headache that we have to solve for customers. And I guess I'm interested, Richard, to get your perspective, because it's not entirely clear for me, but we will be able to allow organizations to consume those digital identities in the state wallets. And there are different ways in which they could be utilized in that flow. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's on our public roadmap. We're going to verify MDLs. So the mobile driver's licenses is governments use more MDoc passport issuance stuff. We'll probably verify those as well. We want to be able to verify the European Union digital identity qualified attestations that are issued by the government or by approved government providers. We are partway through the process of implementing the ability to issue the European Union digital identity SD-JOT format, which is used for qualified attestations and unqualified attestations. And so the vision is you get the government identity so you can onboard without papers, and then you can overlay that with your special information that you as an IDV provider have, and that allows you to provide additional value to your customers, the relying parties, as they interact with these consumers and automate these business processes. I loved you, and we were on a call earlier when somebody said, what about the state wallet? And you're like, yeah, the one that's supposed to come next year, but it will probably be in 3 years. Like nobody knows when we're going to get these state wallets. And so we allow you to get that benefit now of being able to have these credentials that automate processes. And then as governments issue these and they become widely adopted, we have this process by which we'll smoothly be able to consume those to continue automating your commercial sector workflows.
And that's really important, right? Because verifying a government identity is really, really valuable. Like, for all the reasons that we know, but there is extra piece of data or attributes about a user that identity providers and other companies have to verify to allow someone to transact and go about their digital and sort of daily life. And that's where, as Richard is saying, credentials and tying additional attributes in an ecosystem can be really valuable and quite exciting.
Thank you, guys. Great answer. Lots of context. The next question is about kind of business models, I guess. And one of the things, and I'll generalize here, that we saw and maybe still see is, and I will massively generalize because I'll basically say there's two camps. We find that there's some IDVs that are extremely concerned about this new technology coming along and the threat that it has on their existing business model, and are kind of almost doing that ostrich thing of sticking their head in the sand. And you seem to get others that are really embracing it. And so I guess the big part is around business models. Do you see this as kind of complementing what IDVs have today, or do you think this is something that they should be really worried about?
Yeah, I mean, like every change or evolution is like a threat and an opportunity. And mainly it's if you don't adopt it, you're not going to be able to, get the gains. So I think it's definitely an opportunity. I guess the value comes in loads of different formats, and it's how do you visualize how do you want to use decentralized identity in your own business model? We have loads of different ways. Is, just the example that Richard is giving, essentially efficiency for the IDV to create a quicker, faster verification. There is a load of value that the bank or an organization gets that comes with that. And with our solution, you can monetize verification in a privacy preserving way, which I talked about at the start. You can save and reduce costs by not having to do manual verifications. The bank can capture some of that $5 billion yearly opportunity that gets missed to onboard your new customers. So there's loads of different opportunity. And we did do we did a business model webinar a while ago, which got some really, really great feedback. So if anyone's not listened or watched that, I definitely recommend it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ewan. And then on that point, like, I know that Ewan, you were quite careful not to get too into the weeds on how monetization works. But Richard, maybe you can dive into that just a little bit more to give some of the more kind of savvy or more technical audience a little bit more of an insight into how that works, please.
Yeah, one of the key concerns we hear from these IDVs is, if the credentials are usable, then how do I get paid? I currently get paid every time these things get checked. And one of the areas we've really innovated is to be able to have a credential bound or locked to an ecosystem. And so it can only be, of course, the holder, the consumer, can share the data with whoever they want, just like they can talk to them, to whoever they want to. But that relying party can only check the cryptography and see that it's valid, that it hasn't been revoked, that it hasn't been a lie, if they're part of the billing relationship with the ecosystem administrator. And then we can give that ecosystem administrator a report that says, this verifier verified credentials from this issuer using this schema. But we never share the holder data. The holder can talk to whoever they want. But then the verifier can get billed by the ecosystem administrator. If they don't pay, they can get kicked out of the ecosystem. And then the ecosystem administrator can pay the issuer based on the credentials that were used. And so it preserves those existing business models, but it modernizes it. It makes it so you get all the benefits of reusability, of the automated verifiable credential, of the user-focused, user-directed identity, of the user privacy, the consumer not being able to use their credentials without everybody knowing, tracking who they used it with, while still knowing if you haven't paid for this credential, you're not going to be able to read it.
Yeah, very good. And another part, again, is inside. A lot of vendors might be concerned about, for some, the open marketplace is really exciting. For others, they'd be concerned about maybe competitors starting to use some of that information to their own advantage. Richard, how do we try and address that concern that IDVs have around competitors using the credentials that they issue? I think you mentioned it before, but just to be explicit related to this question.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize what credentials do and what they don't do. Currently, the consumer can go share their data with whoever they want. Competitors can sign up for these services and get data. There's lots of ways that data gets shared. We don't solve all those problems, but we do make it so that the credential that is handed to the user can only be used if it's a monetized credential. If it's an ecosystem-bound credential, it can only be used within that payment ecosystem. And so if the ecosystem admin knows who they're doing business with and only approves people to join that ecosystem that they have that billing relationship with, then they know who's going to be able to verify that data and see that it's authentic.
Very good. Fantastic.
One other note worth mentioning. Oh, sorry. I thought of my answer.
All good.
One area I was a little incomplete. We do associate a brand with the ecosystem. And so that's really nice because it allows us to train the holder, the consumer, who they should do business with. They recognize, this is a MasterCard ecosystem, a Visa ecosystem, a Socura ecosystem. And so they get used to who they can do business with. And that not only allows them to know that they're working with trusted parties who are liable to the ecosystem privacy policy, but it also helps them realize if you don't have the right brand, then maybe you shouldn't be sharing the data with them because you don't know what they're going to do with it.
Great. Excellent addition. Thank you for that. So final question from me before we turn it over to audience questions. And Richard, I suspect this will be one for you, but I know it's one that we get asked a lot. What happens if someone either changes devices and needs to recover credentials? Another scenario could be, what happens if I lose my phone when it's unlocked or something like that? How do we try and protect the individual or the holder's data in those circumstances.
Yeah, I mentioned the recovery scenario a minute ago when we talked about where credentials are stored, that we do have this ability to store them in our encrypted data storage, our encrypted data vault, and be able to use that to recover onto different devices. But being able to prevent access to the credentials, there are a number of protections for that as well. As Ewan showed, the first is that there's a biometric to access the wallet, and that's just the device biometric. That's pretty straightforward. But we also allow biometrically binding the credential. So the issuer can request a proof of biometric from the holder as part of issuing the credential, and then embed into the biometrically bound credential a biometric ID. It's not the biometric data, it's just an ID, a privacy preserving ID that then can be reproduced during verification. The holder can do another biometric check and get another biometric check credential and share the same ID. And so the verifier can then say, oh, look, I got this credential, and at the same time, I got an attached credential with the biometric ID, so I know it's the same human that's sharing the credential that received it. So between, in addition to locking people out of the wallet who aren't entitled to it, we do allow that verifier comfort. And that's actually a really good demo. Ewan showed that in the demo of requesting the biometric alongside the primary credential, the biometric bound credential. That shows that you can, in fact, collect data from multiple credentials at the same time, which was one of the audience questions. You just request more than one credential, and you can come in and do those zero knowledge comparisons to say, oh, yes, I do have the biometric ID at the same time as the primary credential.
Excellent. Great way to round that up. Okay, so that's us on to the last phase. We've kind of finished with my questions, and now we're into the audience questions. So here we go. So first question is from Ian. Ian, thank you very much for your question. Ian's question is if you're trying to be an IDV, so if you're an IDV, thus issuing the credential, and just a minor correction, Ian, you could be an IDV and be maybe just the ecosystem convener. There's multiple roles that you could play there. But if you're an IDV and you're issuing a credential, are there tips for how you associate data from multiple data sources to be the same entity? I guess that means from the same entity. So how do you associate multiple data sources to be from the same entity is the way I read that question.
Rich, I think you're going to take that one now.
Yes, I'm just thinking about the best way to answer the question. In IDV, the entire business of these identity verifiers today is to be able to say, oh, look, I have all these different sources, and here's my level of assurance, my likelihood score, my confidence level for the person I'm talking to. And then these relying parties, they have, we talked about this in a previous webinar, they have an identity funnel. The bank has like 4 different identity sources, and if they can't get you verified in the first one, they'll go to the second one, and they'll move down through the funnel. And the more data attributes you accept, the higher the likelihood score that you're talking to the person you think you're talking to. So, if I can collect 5 or 10 attributes about the user, I can get a fairly high likelihood. But for that exact match, the most sure way to do this is to ask the user and just say, can you give me a credential that shows your credit score from one of these IDVs? Can you give me a credential that shows your address from one of these sources, the government or the bank or a KYC provider? And because the user's saying all these credentials apply to me, all these different data sources, they apply to me. And that does come in that subsequent verification. So you've got to get the credential from these sources, and then when the user presents it, they're asserting, oh, all these apply to me, and they pass the level of assurance of the original trusted data source. Plus, you get that added benefit of being able to hold the user responsible for the claims they're making to you.
Excellent, thank you. Hopefully that helps you, Ian. Let us know if it doesn't. We've got someone called M. Maybe it's Michael or someone like that. But they're asking if the customer isn't aware they have a personal credential, as per the demo. How does Jane, I guess, the user controller, manage it as if it was her own? And I'm wondering here the demo part, there was a credential that was Jane was controlling in the wallet, but I don't know if you guys are kind of reading something else into that. So maybe one of you guys want to pick that one up.
Maybe I didn't make it very clear. Maybe I need to work on my demoing skills. But Richard, go on. You explain it.
Yeah, at the time that in the demo, we went through that IDV view. That's not our software. That's the IDV view. And then, the integrating our customer that then integrates, once the bank onboarding is done, they can offer the credential. So that's where we get involved, is how do we offer this credential? And from that point on, Jane knows about the credential. She's been offered a credential and she slurps it into her wallet and then she uses it with the verifier. Now it's important to recognize that adds some friction. The user has to understand what a credential is. They have to understand what a wallet is. We don't think that friction's needed. In most of these ecosystems, you're only dealing with 1 or 2 credentials today. Over time, people will get to know what an identity wallet is and have lots of credentials. But for now, we can abstract away that experience. We have one customer whose POC is for patient health records, and you just have your patient health records in your mobile app. Like, sure, there's 3 credentials behind that record, but the user doesn't need to know that. And especially as we move this data into cloud storage, it gives us a nice ability to say, oh, I collected your biometric to do the IDV. Now I can store that credential. I don't even have to tell you about it. And then during verification, you verify with your biometric. Yes. Take your picture and you get access to those credentials. And you don't necessarily have to know what a credential is for that flow to work. It can be very, very smooth. Of course, over time, as you get 5 or 6 credentials, you'll want to download the mobile app and see those credentials and manipulate them, or download the web, access the web app to be able to manipulate those. But we want to make it so that Jane doesn't have to know what a credential is in order to do business.
Yeah. And I think it's this thing, right, where Richard's been in the space for a long time, and I mean I'm a novice. I've only been at it 2 years. There is all these things, and I guess when we talk about cloud storage and having them stored somewhere, it's not that pure view of SSI that all of us want to get to, and having greater control. But it does give us it's a step in the right direction. And me, Richard, and Nick, we're all total believers on what the future is. But we want to be an enabler, one of those founding companies that moves us in the right direction. So there are lots of things there. If you have that pure view of SSI, that you might be like, oh, that I'm not too sure about that, but we're trying to solve customer problems today and get them on the journey. And I just thought I'd add that.
Excellent, thank you, Ian. And I think the kind of focus for us is trying to make sure that the customer is in control of their information, and even if it's something that's in a cloud wallet, which maybe some might frown on, that cloud wallet is client-side encrypted, so even though the storage is controlled by someone else, the other party cannot read what's there. But yeah, as you say, we're trying to solve real-world problems, so sometimes there's a nuance to what we do. I think as well, Em's got another question, which I think is maybe just kind of linked to maybe the presentation of the demo itself. I think Em's saying per the demo, the bank controls Jane's credential, not Jane. But I think just to be clear again, what Jane is really controlling is the mobile app, and she is getting that credential into that app, and she can decide where that credential goes, and even down to the selective disclosure elements, Jane can decide which aspects of that credential that she wants to share in order to fulfill the requirements of the relying party. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer now. But thanks again for your questions, Em. Moving on to Paco. Paco's question is an interesting one, actually. What happens if VCs have different info? So I think he's talking about maybe some different forms of identity retaining different information. So for example, you might have a passport that has one address. You might have a student card that has your halls of residence or something like that. And I think his question is, how is it up to the user to decide what to provide? I could pick up that one, and the answer is yes. The user can decide what credential that they want to present in order to fulfill the requirements of the relying party. The next question is, he gets 2 for the price. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Richard.
You can.
No, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, that leads a little bit to what Ewan was saying about we get them on the on-ramp and then they get more capabilities as credentials get more widely adopted. I look forward to the day when I have 2 credentials with the same information, but that day is not today. Today we'll be lucky to have 1 credential. And so, sure, the demo we showed, you got 1 or 2 credentials in the ecosystem. When we have multiple credentials, the verifier the relying party, they can pick which ones they trust. So it's going to be very unusual that the relying party is going to trust an address from multiple providers at this point in time. When that day comes, the software allows you to select, like we implement that. We look forward to that. But it's not very common today. And similarly, you can attach self-attested data, self-issued credential in some cases, however you want to do it. You can ask the user, tell me your name without providing a credential. That is possible. It's possible today. You don't need any of our stuff to do that. We can make it easier by putting that in our APIs. But that ability to have self-attested data live alongside verified data exists. The challenge is, will the verifier trust the self-attested data? So the verifier always has a choice of what they want to consume and what they require for their business processes. So there are scenarios where we say, yes, give me your, like you showed in that form fill, you got the verified data when you submitted the apartment or you submitted the car loan, but you also had the self-attested, this is the car I'm trying to buy right now. This is how many people are going to live in the apartment. That's not in the credentials. So these are going to live alongside each other in order to automate the workflow.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Paco's kind of second point was, what if there are data points in a form where you don't have the info on the credentials? And I could pick this one up. I think basically you'd have to provide what you can, and then you'd be required to manually fill out the rest of the form. So I think what the credential will get you is part of the way there. So it's really meaning that most of the form is filled out for you. The receiver of that information, the relying party, is getting that verified data, but there's much, much less to do at the end when you need to maybe add a couple of bits of information that weren't that you didn't have credentials to prove. So I think that's the answer there, unless you guys want to add in any extra sauce that you've got.
And that verifier can see the difference between the trusted verifiable data and the self-attested data that they should be more skeptical of.
Very good. Okay, we're getting close. We got 6 minutes to go. I think we're going to fit everything in. We have a question from Karen. Karen, thank you very much for you actually got a couple of questions. So good to use those whilst you can. Your question is, what happens if a customer or a holder would share the credential with the wrong verifier by mistake? Can they recall it? And questions around can the information be deleted? So Richard, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, within verifiable credentials themselves, there's no real way to do that. But we do allow communication between that wallet and the verifier. Once you've established that connection, you can go ahead and continue that communication. And so there are scenarios where you might want to give the holder the ability to say, I'm revoking my information I gave you. So I should differentiate. The issuer can always revoke the credential, and at that point, it can't be verified by the verifier. But you can also extend, our mobile SDK allows you to customize. You can extend that mobile app or that client experience to allow the holder to say, I'm tracking who I've given information to, and I want to do a GDPR data deletion request or whatever we want to call it, right to be forgotten. Or maybe it's a correction under the U.S. Fair Credit Reporting Act. I want to correct the data I gave you. So that's an extension, a customization for your specific requirements. But that encrypted communication we allow through the DIDCOM protocol, for those who care, makes it so you can implement these kind of flows really well, really seamlessly. But it is an extension based on your specific requirements.
Thank you, Richard. And again, kind of another part, Karen actually gets a few questions in. She does very well. But the other question is, what if a verifier is fraudulent and makes a copy of the customer data as soon as they receive it? Any kind of way to combat that?
That's why that ecosystem brand is so valuable, because then you're telling the holder, here's the verifiers you should trust. And if the verifier isn't in the ecosystem, by default, the wallet's going to issue a big warning. Make sure you want to give this to the verifier. They're not in the ecosystem. But you can actually disable that sharing in a custom wallet if you choose. And of course, if it's an ecosystem bound credential, then it can't be shared outside the ecosystem by default. So we limit that fraudulent verifier use case. Once the information has been shared with the verifier, of course, we don't have control over what they're going to do with it. They can copy that information. That's where having legal protections like a GDPR right to be forgotten is so valuable, because you can then, there are other ways to manage that privacy. And having that ecosystem membership is valuable, because you can go back to the ecosystem and say, your verifier misused my information, kick them out, and there's a penalty there. And that ecosystem admin can actually have audits and things like that to ensure that verifiers are respecting the policies that are being promoted to the consumer in order to make sure the consumer has trust in that ecosystem.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. I think we're probably onto our final question now, or thereabouts. Another great point is brought up where there is no consistency, I should say, to the forms that web forms. Typically, the fields are in different places. I think this is an inherent problem with password managers. I know that both of mine struggle with forms that are kind of filled out in different order. How does credentialing or verifiable credentials deal with this lack of standardization in web forms?
Yeah, we don't offer that form fill experience. That's a customization. And so in that demo, once you scan the QR code and that data is received on the back end, it comes via webhook. Then you have an ID for which webhook request, which QR code, which verification request is being serviced by that webhook. You then call back that ID to say, oh, this is the web page. Let's go fill in those forms. So the developer who built that form page, they have to do that tie-in. And yeah, it's not very consistent. That's something I'd really like us to provide over time, but until it's one of those scenarios where there's not a lot of consistency today in practice. And so we want to work together closely with our customers in order to figure out the best way to make that process easier.
I can literally see our product roadmap filling up as you speak, Richard.
I made no time commitments.
There you go. Nice one. Very, very last question. So we get another one from M. I think that's all the questions. I think as well, if anyone does have any questions that they like I would do, you always think about them after you've had the conversation. If that's the case, please go to our kind of Discord channel. Would be a good place. Also, probably Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever poison you use most. If there's any questions that you want to know the answer to that we don't answer, we've also got some web forms, some contact forms on the website at doc.io if we haven't answered anything that you wanted to know the answer to. Final question from M. Can a person, I think this is related to much kind of more SSI kind of individual perspective, but can a person have multiple different personas? So I think from a perspective of, I'm a student, I'm a son, I'm a friend, how would our solution cater for that, Richard?
Yeah, and I look forward to the day when I have multiple digital personas. Today, we're still getting that first credential adopted, but that's where that cloud wallet is so valuable. So the short answer is absolutely. If you have 3 different issuers give you 3 different credentials, then those are going to represent different relationships you have with those issuers. One might be your business, one might be your student, one might be your healthcare provider, one might be your bank or whatever. And one of the challenges we have is you're probably going to interact with these credentials through that persona's interface. My student's going to be my student mobile app. My bank mobile app is going to be my financial information. My employer is probably going to have an employer portal I'm going to interact with. And so you end up with multiple digital wallets. And that's where having that cloud storage that's resolved with your biometric becomes valuable, because we make it really easy for you to share the same credentials in these different places. You can filter based on the use case that makes sense for that time, but we want to make it so that I can take that identity with me through these different domains and decide what I want to present where.
Thank you very much. I think we're out of time. That is a wrap. I really appreciate everyone who joined us today to watch, to listen, and to answer all the amazing questions. Ewan and Richard, thanks to your time and all your expertise and effort, and also Francisco, who's waiting behind the wings, who's doing a lot of hard work that no one necessarily always sees. But yeah, this is a great event. Just to recap, we're really looking at how IDVs can use entity resolution and customer data matching to reduce onboarding friction. Anyone that's signed up, the event will be sent out. Normally takes us a couple of days to finish off the editing. And yeah, if there's any questions that you have, either about the kind of platform that we have or any questions, number of options. Probably doc.io is probably the best place, and you can reach out to some of our teams there. Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Cheers, guys. Cheers, everyone.